Are buying boats and enjoying our unlimited access to the ocean, but not everyone is a responsible boat owner.
We're moving and destroying derelict vessels that are clogging up our waterways, creating navigational and environmental hazards.
Something has gone deeply wrong in the waters of America, and almost nobody is talking about it. Right now, while you are watching this, thousands of boats are quietly dying in harbors and bays from Florida all the way to Washington, leaking oil and lead and poison into the same water your family swims in. The people meant to stop this are losing the fight. The true number is a mystery to everyone, and the reason behind it all should genuinely frighten you. The numbers nobody wanted to say out loud. Let's start with exactly where things stand right now, because you deserve the truth before you hear the long and strange story behind it. In the state of Florida, which holds more boats than almost anywhere else on the planet, the wildlife officers keep a running list of vessels that have been left to rot in public water. In January of the year 2025, that list held 1,040 boats sitting in the bays and rivers and tangled mangroves, just waiting for somebody to come and haul them out. Now here is the part that surprised even me when I first read it. By the close of that same year, Florida had managed to pull out 475 of those vessels, and the official count dropped to its lowest level since they began keeping records. That sounds like a victory, and in some small way, it truly is. But the people doing the back-breaking work will tell you something that should stop you cold in your tracks. For every single boat they drag out of the water, another one quietly slips into its place. And the list never truly empties, no matter how hard they work. Travel all the way across the country to Washington State, and you will find the very same exhausting battle playing out. Their derelict vessel program has removed more than 1,200 boats since the year 2002, and in their last 2-year stretch alone, they cleared a record 411 of them. And yet, despite all that effort,
the abandoned boat is pulled from the depths of Biscayne Bay.
They put divers in the water. They place straps around the vessel's hull. They use a barge-mounted crane to lift the vessel up.
They still wake up every single morning with around 300 abandoned hulls floating in their waters, some of them leaking fuel, some of them slowly sinking, and all of them somebody else's forgotten mess. So you would naturally think that we must know the real number for the entire country. The honest answer is that we do not. When a reporter asked the Boat US Foundation how many of these ghost boats are scattered across American waterways, their director of outreach, a woman named Alana Keating, gave an answer that honestly still haunts me. She said that nobody knows. There is no master list, no national count, and no single office in this country keeping track of how enormous this thing has actually grown. The boats also keep coming in a tide that never stops. The marine industry estimates that somewhere close to 200,000 recreational boats reach the end of their useful life in this country every single year. That is 200,000 vessels a year, all searching for somewhere to die, in a nation that never once built anywhere for them to go. And when you start to ask why that is, why there is simply no place for a dead boat to rest, the answer leads you straight back to one single thing. It leads you to a material we once celebrated as nothing short of a miracle. The miracle that refused to die. To really understand why your local marina is filling up with these floating corpses, you have to travel back to the moment that boating stopped being a hobby reserved for the wealthy. For most of human history, a boat was built from wood, and wood meant endless labor, constant rot, and a never-ending drain on your wallet. Then fiberglass arrived, and everything changed in a way that felt almost like magic to the working families who lived through it. Builders suddenly learned they could pour glass fibers and liquid resin into a mold, and pop out a strong, smooth, and cheap hull in a tiny fraction of the time it once took. All at once, a regular family with a regular income could afford a boat to call their own. Through the 1960s and deep into the 1970s, boats poured out of American factories by the hundreds of thousands, and for the first time in history, the open water belonged to ordinary people. The old wooden boat purists absolutely hated this new world, and they sneered at these modern hulls with insults like frozen snot. But the families happily buying them did not care even a little. What almost nobody truly understood back then was the terrible flaw hiding quietly inside the miracle. Fiberglass is very nearly impossible to break down. It does not rust away like metal, it does not rot away like wood, and it does not crumble back into the earth like the boats of the old days. A well-cared-for fiberglass hull can easily last 50 years, 60 years, or even longer than that. Some experts now believe these boats could survive well over 100 years if simply left alone, which means the boat you buy this weekend could outlive you, your children, and quite possibly your grandchildren too. I want you to really think about what that means for a moment. We did not just build better boats, we accidentally created one of the most durable objects a normal person can ever own. And then we sold many millions of them with no plan whatsoever for the day people would finally want them gone. Every factory that celebrated another sale was quietly adding another stone to a mountain that someone, someday, would be forced to deal with. There is also a cruel twist buried deep within the chemistry itself. Even when you finally decide to destroy one of these stubborn hulls, the simple act of grinding and cutting fiberglass throws a fine and dangerous dust into the air. A dust full of tiny glass needles that can scar a person's lungs and even cause cancer. So the material quietly punishes you for keeping it, and then it punishes you all over again for trying to get rid of it. That single fact that a fiberglass boat is almost impossible to kill is the buried seed of this entire crisis. Because when a thing refuses to die on its own terms, somebody eventually has to pay good money to put it down. And that is the exact moment where the whole system begins to fall apart. Worth more dead and forgotten. Here is the moment the story turns truly dark, because it quietly explains almost everything you are about to see. There comes a day in the life of every old boat when the cost to throw it away properly grows higher than the boat is actually worth. The people who study this for a living have a brutal little formula they use to describe it. When the value of the boat drops below the cost of disposing of it, the boat gets abandoned. That is the entire tragedy folded neatly into a single sentence. Let me put some real money on that idea so you can feel the full weight of it pressing down. To dispose of a boat the proper way, you might pay anywhere from a few $1,000s for a small one to $15,000 or more for a larger fiberglass cruiser.
We do live in South Florida, one of the boating capitals of the world, and these in particular are a hazard to boaters in our waterways, at-risk and derelict boats sitting for months or even longer.
The Boat US Foundation estimates that the cost of properly getting rid of a tired old boat that still floats can run somewhere between $5,000 and $25,000. Now, I want you to imagine that you own a boat that is barely worth a single $1,000 on its very best day. You are suddenly being asked to pay far more to destroy it than you could ever hope to sell it for. And the temptation to simply turn your back and walk away becomes almost impossible to resist. And here is the cruel loophole that honestly makes my blood boil every time I think about it. The man who runs Florida's derelict vessel program, named Phil Horning, explained exactly how this trap springs shut on people. An owner who cannot afford the disposal cost will often sell the boat to somebody for a single dollar just to get their own name off the title. That new owner usually has even less money and even fewer options than the last one. And before long, that $1 boat becomes a $12,000 removal bill that lands squarely on the taxpayer. A boat changes hands for the price of a candy bar and quietly transforms into a fortune that the public has to pay. Now compare all of this to your own old car for just a second, because the difference is the entire point. When your car finally dies, somebody will always take it off your hands, and they will often even pay you for the scrap metal hiding inside it. A boat is the exact and painful opposite. As one expert plainly put it, there are simply no sustainable disposal options for boats. So it just becomes easier for people to abandon them or sell them off for pennies on the dollar. Your old car holds value even in death. Your old boat slowly becomes a curse you cannot escape. Then, the pandemic came along and poured gasoline on the fire. During those locked-down years, people who were desperate to escape their homes bought boats in record numbers, often paying top dollar for vessels they barely knew how to handle. Now, those very same boats are aging fast. The resale market has gone cold, and many owners are bitterly discovering that they cannot sell the dream they bought without losing a small fortune. A salvage worker named Walt Bone watched this happen again and again, explaining that owners run into a financial crisis. They cannot afford the boat any longer, so they simply leave it behind. And then the marinas get stuck holding the wreck. When walking away quietly becomes the cheapest option a person has, they scrape the numbers off the side, slip away in the night, and leave behind something far more sinister than just an old boat. The ghost fleet and the owners who vanished. What gets left floating in these waters has earned a chilling nickname among the weary people who deal with it every day. They call them ghost boats, and that name fits them far better than you might first imagine. A ghost boat is a vessel whose owner has carefully erased every single trace of who they are. They grind off the identification numbers, they strip away the registration papers, and they quietly drop the hull into some hard-to-reach corner of a bay where nobody will ever see them do the deed. That same salvage operator, Walt Bone, described watching people dump boats into the fragile wetlands of New Jersey after carefully removing every clue to their identity. Once those numbers have been ground away, he asked the one obvious question that has no possible answer. He asked how you could ever figure out whose boat it was. The owner has become a ghost, the boat has become an orphan, and the enormous bill quietly becomes everyone's problem to share. This very same trick works just as well down in Texas, where a boat does not legally change owners until the new person actually registers it. So people simply never register it at all. They peel off the numbers, and they let the boat slowly fall to pieces in public water, with no name attached to it. A salvage manager there named Elizabeth McMillan warned that the more a boat is allowed to deteriorate, the more dangerous and compromised it becomes for everyone. And the cost of cleaning up after these vanished owners is genuinely staggering to consider. Across the country, removing just one abandoned boat averages more than $24,000. In some places, that price climbs by hundreds of dollars for every single foot of the boat's length. And one Florida county all on its own spends over $800,000 a year just on removals. But the single most outrageous story in this entire mess does not even involve some broke owner at all. Instead, it involves the federal government itself. In Washington state, the program manager Troy Wood watched a 169-foot former government ship called the Pacific Producer slowly become a living nightmare. It was sold off into private hands, passed quietly through a maze of shell companies, and eventually abandoned while floating directly over a heavily polluted underwater site. By the time the state had finished cleaning up the oil, the hazardous waste, and even a sprawling rat infestation crawling aboard, the final bill had climbed to $3.9 million. That one single boat devoured nearly 40% of the entire program's 2-year budget. And the Pacific Producer was very far from alone in this. Investigators eventually uncovered at least 37 former military and government vessels scattered across Washington and Oregon that had been sold off cheaply at auction, then quietly abandoned, costing those two states more than $21 million combined. Troy Wood asked the government a question that truly deserves a real answer. He asked why they were selling these dying ships into private hands when they already knew full well the vessels were at the very end of their lives. While the agencies chased these vanished owners across state lines and through layers of fake companies, the boats they left rotting behind are not simply sitting there in peace. Beneath the calm and quiet surface of the water, every one of them is busy doing slow and poisonous work. The poison you cannot see. This is the part of the story that I believe people understand the very least, and it is also the part that should worry you the very most, especially if you happen to live near the coast or eat anything that comes out of it. A rotting boat is not just an ugly eyesore floating in your harbor. It is a slow-motion chemical spill, quietly releasing a little more of its poison into the water with each passing day. As these old hulls break down, they leak a long and frightening list of heavy metals into the mud beneath them, including lead, copper, mercury, and zinc. The small creatures that live on the seafloor soak up those metals into their bodies. The bigger creatures then eat the smaller ones, and the poison climbs its way steadily up the food chain, one hungry bite at a time. Then there is the paint to worry about as well. The bottoms of these boats are coated in a copper-based paint designed to kill off the growth that clings to a hull. And in a crowded marina with poor water flow, That copper builds up in the sediment until it reaches levels that affect nearly all the life around it. But scientists have recently uncovered something about fiberglass itself that genuinely changed the way I see this entire problem. As these hulls weather and crack and slowly crumble apart, they shed countless tiny needles of glass fiber into the water around them, each one far too small for the human eye to ever catch. A marine biologist over in England named Dr. Corina Chiocan studied the oysters and mussels living near a busy boatyard, and she found them absolutely packed with these fiberglass shards, each one roughly 10 times thinner than a single human hair.
On 3 separate occasions, taken different oyster and mussel samples to analyze in the lab. Every occasion, we've found micro fiberglass shards and or microplastics.
In some of the shellfish, she counted thousands upon thousands of these particles inside every kilogram of flesh. These are the very same kinds of shellfish that end up sitting on dinner plates in homes and restaurants everywhere. The fiberglass we keep putting into the water to build our boats is now being found living inside the very creatures we pull out of that same water to eat. And because fiberglass simply does not break down, a boatyard that has been quietly shedding these fibers for decades creates a contamination that essentially never goes away. A fresh study completed in 2026 along the coast of Canada confirmed this exact same grim pattern, naming these abandoned and decaying boats as a constant and completely unmanaged source of the pollution. The researcher who led that work, named Juan Jose Alava, offered a warning that lingers in the mind, reminding everyone that prevention is always far better than any cure. The damage does not even stop at the chemistry either. When a heavy hull finally settles down onto the seafloor, it crushes and smothers the seagrass beds and the reefs that countless fish depend on every day to survive. A fishing guide down in the Florida Keys named Will Benson said that he watches this harm to the seagrass happen with his own 2 eyes, day after exhausting day, in waters that are supposed to be carefully protected. A professor named Mario Tamburi summed up the whole grim situation in the simplest possible terms, explaining that this is essentially a plastic pollution problem hiding in plain sight. And nowhere has this poison arrived faster or in far greater numbers all at once than in the places where the great storms come crashing ashore, and those storms are growing more violent with every single year that passes. When the storm builds the graveyard. Most of the time, this crisis grows very slowly, expanding by just one abandoned boat at a time. But a single hurricane has the terrible power to create an entire fleet of derelict vessels in one dreadful afternoon. And this is exactly where the human heartbreak buried in this story becomes utterly impossible to ignore.
Big boats, small boats, tossed around, piled on top of each other by Irma like so many children's bathtub toys.
When Hurricane Irma tore violently through the Florida Keys back in the year 2017, the cleanup crews ended up removing more than 1,700 damaged and displaced boats from the water. In one single harbor down in Marathon, out of roughly 260 boats tied carefully to their moorings, only around 60 of them managed to survive the storm at all. All of the rest were either sunk to the bottom, smashed into bridges, or hurled deep into the mangroves, where many of them still remain to this very day. Then along came the year 2024, when Hurricanes Helene and Milton swept through one after the other and left more than 700 fresh derelict vessels scattered across the waters of Florida. Here is the deep human cost that the news reports almost never bother to explain to you. In a place like the Keys, where the cost of housing has spiraled completely out of reach, many of these boats were never toys for the wealthy at all. They were actually homes for real people. Folks who simply could not afford a house on dry land were living aboard older vessels anchored just offshore. And when the storm finally came roaring in, it did not just destroy a piece of property. It erased the only affordable place those struggling people had left to live. Now a wave of new rules pushing those anchored boats out is pitting the urgent need to protect the water against the equally urgent need to give working people somewhere to simply exist. And there is no easy or painless answer to that particular heartbreak. These storms have quietly built their graveyards in places you would honestly never expect to find them. In one bay near San Diego, an anchorage that was once completely free and open to all has given up around 50 tons of debris and 75 fully sunken vessels over the years, with the Navy reporting that a single broken boat once dumped hundreds of gallons of fuel straight into the water. Over in the winding rivers of California's Delta, officials recently carried out their largest cleanup effort ever attempted at a single location, pulling nearly 1,000 tons of debris and more than 1,000 gallons of diesel fuel out of just one abandoned barge. And sometimes the boat simply sits there, year after lonely year, purely because nobody will agree to pay the bill. Down in Galveston, Texas, a yacht washed ashore during a hurricane in the summer of 2024, and it was officially cleared for removal a long time ago. Yet there it stubbornly remains to this day, because as the state itself quietly admitted, no money is available to actually make the removal happen. With these wrecks now piling up faster than any crew on Earth could ever haul them away, a small and stubborn group of innovators has finally started racing to solve the one impossible problem that started this entire nightmare in the first place: the problem of how to actually kill a fiberglass hull for good. The fight to bury the immortal. For many long years, it genuinely seemed like there was simply no answer to be found anywhere. You could not melt these boats down, you could not let them rot away on their own, and the recycling centers flatly refused to touch them. Then, a determined group up in Rhode Island decided to try something that nobody in all of North America had ever managed to pull off before. And their idea is honestly rather clever when you hear it. They take the old fiberglass hulls, they shred them down into a coarse and gritty mixture, and then they feed that material directly into cement kilns, where it burns away as fuel and becomes part of the raw material used to make fresh cement. The boat that would have rotted in a marina for an entire century instead quietly becomes part of a sidewalk or a building somewhere. The man who chased this solution all across the world, a project manager named Evan Ridley, studied how recyclers over in Europe were already handling old wind turbine blades made from the very same stubborn material. And then he carefully brought all of those hard-won lessons back home with him. Over the full course of the pilot program, his team recycled around 60 tons of fiberglass, finally proving to the world that this impossible thing could actually be done. For a problem that had felt completely hopeless for so long, that small success is a genuine and welcome spark of light in the dark. But I would be lying straight to your face if I pretended for even a moment that this fixes everything, because the single cruelest part of this whole story shows up right here at the finish line. Even with this clever new recycling method up and running, the cost still lands at well over $1,000 to properly process a single small boat. And that stubborn number runs us straight back into the exact same wall we first crashed into at the very beginning of all this. The very people abandoning these boats are doing it precisely because they do not want to spend any more money on them. The cure for this sickness now exists, but for the moment, it still costs more than the simple crime of just walking away. A man named David Dursey, who works on the recycling effort, admitted plainly that the cost of recycling stays prohibitive for people who are really just looking to get rid of boats they no longer want to spend a single dollar on. So, the smartest minds working on this have started thinking much earlier in the boat's long life. Several states now run turn-in programs, where an owner can voluntarily hand over a tired old vessel before it ever becomes a derelict disaster floating in the bay. Because getting rid of a boat while it still floats is far cheaper than fishing it off the seafloor years later. Florida's own version of this program has already removed more than 220 at-risk vessels since the year 2023. The Boat US Foundation, backed by a powerful $10 million grant, is even now building the very first national database so that the public can finally report and track these wrecks, fixing that giant blind spot where nobody ever knew the true number. Yet even this fragile hope sits on shaky and uncertain ground. In February of 2026, a proposed budget in Washington state threatened to pull $5 million away from the very program fighting these boats, redirecting that money somewhere else entirely, even as hundreds of vessels sat waiting their turn for removal. The official in charge of those public lands, a man named Dave Upthegrove, summed up this entire long war in a handful of words that I genuinely cannot shake from my mind. He said that they haul the boats out and recycle them, and then new ones simply rise up to take their place. Now, before I finally let you go, I owe you something honest, because the internet absolutely loves to make this already serious crisis sound even worse than it truly is. You may have seen some wild claims floating around online. Claims that millions of boats are secretly sinking in one single hidden graveyard, or that the whole boating industry is quietly hiding some deliberate and evil plot against the public. The real truth does not need any of that exaggeration to be frightening. There is no proof at all of one giant secret armada of millions of vessels rotting in a single place. And there is no grand conspiracy out there pulling the strings behind the curtain. The real story is much quieter, and somehow that makes it scarier. It is the story of a miracle material that we simply never figured out how to lay to rest. The story of an honest little math problem that quietly turns good people into ghosts, and the story of a rising tide of immortal hulls that has only just begun to wash ashore. So here is the single thought that I keep coming back to again and again. We built ourselves something that would last forever, long before we ever once stopped to ask what forever would actually end up costing us all. What do you think is the real answer to this growing crisis? And have you ever spotted one of these rotting boats near where you live? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I read every single one of them, and I genuinely want to hear what you have to say.